On September 23, 2024, at precisely 1 p.m., a Russian military patrol aircraft was seen flying alarmingly close to Japanese airspace. The Japanese military, immediately concerned by the aircraft's proximity, issued a radio warning to the Russian jet, instructing it to change course. Shockingly, despite these explicit warnings, the Russian aircraft continued on its path, eventually breaching Japan's airspace and flying dangerously near Reban Island. The Russian patrol aircraft then began a series of sudden reversals, repeatedly entering and swiftly retreating from Japanese airspace. By the third breach, Japan's military decided to take unprecedented action, something not seen in 66 years. In a dramatic escalation, Japanese F-15 and F-35 fighter jets scrambled and fired warning flares in the direction of the Russian aircraft, signaling their intent to defend the airspace. The flares served not only as a stark warning, but were also a defense mechanism in case the Russian plane launched missiles toward Japan. Between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m., the Russian jet continued its provocative maneuvers, repeatedly violating Japanese airspace. Finally, after several hours of tension, the aircraft withdrew and returned to Russian territory. Though this was an extraordinary move, it's far from the only threat Russia has been hinting at toward Japan. On that same day, September 23, 2024, 9 Russian naval ships were spotted in the Perouse Strait, one of the narrowest points separating the two nations. At this location, Japan and Russia are only 42 kilometers or 26 miles apart. Lately, Russia has escalated its presence by sending some of its most heavily armed naval ships to patrol this tense and highly strategic stretch of water. But many are left wondering, why is hostility growing between these two nations? With Russia already deeply entrenched in a major war with Ukraine, you'd think they'd avoid escalating military tensions on yet another front, especially with Japan. Engaging in another conflict seems risky, right? Well, Russia doesn't see it that way, and the reason lies with these islands right here. This is the Kuril Island chain, a group of 56 islands that have been a point of contention between Russia and Japan since 1855. These islands are rugged and remote, many of them formed by volcanic eruptions, making them unsuitable for agriculture. However, despite their harsh landscape, they hold immense strategic value for both nations. Control of the Kurils provides direct access to the Pacific Ocean and key naval ports, making them a critical geopolitical asset. These islands have been so crucial that Russia and Japan have fought multiple wars over who controls them. In 1855, the Treaty of Shimoda was signed to define the initial division of the Kuril Islands between the two nations. Under this agreement, the islands of Iturup, Kunashiri, Shikotan, and Habamai were recognized as Japanese territory, while the islands from Urupu and further north were designated as Russian territory. This treaty also made Sakhalin Island a unique case of joint rule between Japan and Russia, allowing citizens from both nations to settle there freely. Such shared borders are rare, and for good reason. Russian and Japanese settlers on Sakhalin often didn't coexist peacefully. Tensions escalated as disputes arose, with neither side fully satisfied under this shared governance. The absence of a clear border intensified conflicts as both nations established settlements on the island, resulting in numerous territorial disputes. It quickly became evident that this arrangement of joint ownership was unworkable. Consequently, in 1875, a new agreement known as the Treaty of St. Petersburg was reached. This treaty stipulated that Russia would take full control of Sakhalin Island, while Japan would gain complete authority over the Kuril Island chain extending all the way to the Russian mainland. This treaty resolved the complications of joint land ownership and was initially accepted by both nations. However, it did not address the deeper strategic and economic rivalry that existed between them. Over time, Japan grew increasingly dissatisfied with the agreement, particularly as it became apparent that Sakhalin was an island abundant in valuable resources. After the treaty, Russia discovered vast oil reserves on Sakhalin and in the adjacent Sea of Okhotsk. In contrast, Japan found few natural resources on the Kuril Islands, making it seem like Russia had secured a more advantageous deal. During the late 1800s, Japan was experiencing rapid growth and had ambitions to expand westward into the Asian mainland. Japan had a keen interest in what we now recognize as Korea. The nation aimed for Korea to be an independent entity, free from Chinese domination and influenced by Japan. Confident in their military strength, Japan declared war on China in 1894, initiating the First Sino-Japanese War. During this period, Japan was intent on bolstering its military to facilitate territorial expansion. They turned to influential European powers, particularly Great Britain, seeking assistance to hasten their military modernization. This alliance provided Japan with an edge over China's Qing dynasty in terms of advanced equipment, military tactics, and overall organizational structure. Japan's military operations were strategically planned, focusing on key naval ports like Port Arthur, which were vital for control in the region. This modernization proved effective, allowing Japan to swiftly defeat the Qing dynasty in a war that concluded in under a year, culminating on April 17, 1895. The conflict led to the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which significantly expanded Japan's influence by granting it access to Taiwan, the Liaodong Peninsula, and southern Manchuria, marking a pivotal moment in Japan's emergence as a regional power. While Japan didn't gain full control over Korea, it did establish significant political and economic influence on the peninsula. The acquisition of the Liaodong Peninsula proved immensely advantageous for Japan, granting them control over Port Arthur, a strategic shipping and naval base capable of dominating maritime traffic in Northeast Asia. This port was naturally fortified by rugged hills and mountains to the north, making land invasions particularly challenging. Japan's victory in the First Sino-Japanese War marked its emergence as a formidable imperial power in East Asia and the launch of its expansionist ambitions. However, shortly after the treaty was signed, Russia, with its own aspirations in East Asia, became increasingly alarmed by Japan's growing dominance. Russia was especially concerned about Japan's control over Port Arthur, a naval base it had coveted for many years. While Russia controlled the port of Vladivostok, it was far less advantageous, as its waters freeze during winter, rendering it unusable for several months. Seeking a more viable warm water port in East Asia, Russia sought the support of its European allies, France and Germany, both of whom were eager to expand their influence in the region. Together, these three powers pressured Japan to relinquish the Liaodong Peninsula, arguing that Japan's control posed a threat to peace and stability in East Asia. Their combined diplomatic efforts aimed to undermine Japan's position and reshape the balance of power in the region. Despite having a formidable military for its time, Japan lacked the manpower to challenge the three powerful European empires, France, Germany, and Russia. This coalition, known as the Triple Intervention, posed a significant threat. In light of this situation, Japan decided it would be wiser to avoid direct confrontation and focus on strengthening its military forces. By doing so, they aimed to prepare for future opportunities to expand their empire without engaging in a potentially disastrous conflict at that moment. Japan complied with the demands of the Triple Intervention and returned the Liaodong Peninsula to China in exchange for 30 million taels of silver. However, it quickly became apparent that Russia's intentions weren't centered on China's self-defense. Rather, Russia had its eyes set on claiming the land for itself. Shortly after the Triple Intervention in 1898, Russia coerced China into leasing Port Arthur to them. For years, Russia had yearned for a warm water port with year-round access to the Pacific Ocean. Faced with pressure, China reluctantly accepted Russia's lease proposal, transferring control of the port to them. This move prompted a significant influx of Russians to the Liaodong Peninsula, resulting in a pronounced Russian influence in southern Manchuria. What had initially seemed like a profitable outcome for Japan soon turned into a source of humiliation and resentment towards the European powers, particularly Russia, which directly benefited from the situation. This growing animosity fueled Japan's determination to strengthen its military and pursue its own imperial ambitions, especially in Korea and Manchuria. Japanese nationalism was on the rise, with a significant portion of the population advocating for war against Russia. The resentment towards Russia grew so intense that it culminated in the first major conflict between the two nations in 1904, known as the Russo-Japanese War. In this war, Russia aimed to regain control over key territories in Korea and Manchuria, particularly focusing on Port Arthur and the Liaodong Peninsula. The conflict erupted with a surprise attack on Port Arthur on February 8, 1904, damaging several Russian warships. This sudden assault caught Russian leaders off guard, as they had underestimated the capabilities of the Japanese military. Following the attack, Japan effectively blocked the port, severing any chance of Russian reinforcements or supplies reaching their forces. Japanese forces began their land invasion further north on the peninsula, advancing toward Port Arthur. Within 5 months, they gained control of the mountainous terrain to the north and used heavy artillery to target remaining Russian warships. By January 1905, Japan officially controlled Port Arthur and aimed to eliminate the last Russian troops in Manchuria. Meanwhile, Russia faced internal turmoil as the 1905 revolution sparked widespread unrest. Japan's advanced military technology, coupled with Russia's internal struggles, forced Russia to surrender. The Treaty of Portsmouth, proposed by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt and signed on September 5, 1905, ended the war, marking the first time an Asian power defeated a European empire. This shift challenged perceptions of European dominance. Following the war, Russia had to give up valuable territories, including the Liaodong Peninsula and parts of Manchuria, and also southern half of Sakhalin Island and the totality of the Kuril Islands. From 1917 to 1922, the Soviet Union sought to reclaim territory lost in the Russo-Japanese War. Despite the war's conclusion, tensions continued in southern Manchuria, leading to smaller border conflicts between Japan and Russia. To resolve this ongoing strife, both nations signed the Japanese-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact on April 13, 1941. This treaty established mutual neutrality in the event of an outside attack and was set to last for 5 years, benefiting both countries. With the Japanese confident the Soviets wouldn't invade the Liaodong Peninsula, they focused their military on expanding into the Philippines and Malaysian islands. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union shifted forces from the east to Europe as World War II intensified. However, Japan became complacent, and on December 7, 1941, attacked Pearl Harbor, aligning itself with Germany and provoking the U.S. This led to Japan's rapid decline as the U.S. responded with military force. Though the U.S. sought Soviet assistance against Japan, the Neutrality Pact kept the Soviets uninvolved until August 8, 1945, when they declared war on Japan following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Viewing this as betrayal, Japan was in no position to resist. The Soviets quickly invaded Manchuria and claimed the Kuril Islands and southern Sakhalin, leading to Japan's surrender under the Potsdam Declaration. The vague terms of the Potsdam Declaration led to disputes over the Kuril Islands, as Japan still claimed some territories. In 1951, the San Francisco Peace Treaty ended the war with Japan but failed to clarify ownership of the Kuril Islands, causing ongoing tensions. Today, Japan argues that the islands Iturup, Kunashiri, Hobamai, and Shikotan are part of its territory, while Russia asserts continuous control since 1945. Despite historical grievances, both nations recently showed interest in negotiating ownership of these islands. However, relations soured after Japan imposed sanctions on Russia due to its invasion of Ukraine. Japan has since ramped up its military budget significantly, aiming to enhance its defense capabilities in the face of regional threats from China, North Korea, and Russia, marking a shift from its post-World War II pacifist stance. As we reflect on the complex history of territorial disputes between Japan and Russia, it's clear that unresolved issues from World War II continue to shape relations today. The legacy of the Potsdam Declaration and the San Francisco Peace Treaty highlights the challenges of clarity in diplomatic agreements, leading to ongoing tensions over the Kuril Islands. What are your thoughts about it? Will Japan and Russia find a path to resolution, or will historical grievances continue to hinder cooperation? Please let us know in the comments section. Please subscribe and stay tuned for our next video.